get. Here we go.
Treat.
That's the way to get him in. Promises. And here he comes. So much snow, you guys. It's like all the way up his body. Okay, good boy. Oh goodness, no, I didn't make that promise. That wasn't me. That was someone else. Make sure you close the door. Okay, so checking in, this week we have our Article 2 critique that is due. Hopefully that is not a surprise to all of you. People are aware. Okay, so it is due by Friday. And how has it been chatting with each other about group stuff and research? You're like, should we be doing that? Yes. Answer is yes. Any questions about that? Can you guys hear me? Hello. You can. Okay. Any questions or no?
What would you say are some good questions we can start at the beginning of kind of getting together as a group to feel out what we want to research and how we want to do it? What would you say are some things we should look at?
Great question. So you guys have created or picked at least a somewhat broad topic or the beginning of a topic, looking at the relationship between two constructs. So perhaps the first thing you should do is ask yourself, what is it you're curious about those two constructs? What is it you're hoping to answer? And that will guide you then towards how you want to assess it. So when you write up your literature review, you're going to be gathering all of the research from past studies that are relevant to this topic, right? But unless you kind of work backwards into what it is you're trying to figure out and how you want to figure it out, it's kind of hard then to know what articles to pull. So for instance, if I'm looking at how to predict success the first year of college, and that's my question, like, how will I know if students are successful? Then perhaps I need to be thinking, how am I going to define success? And how can I then measure it amongst my participant pool? So maybe what I'll be interested in actually is looking at GPA, at which point I know that I need to be in contact with a registrar to get student GPA, right? So that would be the way I would think back. And then I would go back into literature. Ada, is there something funky going on? Am I being silly? I could see you're laughing and I'm like,
no, you're good. Sorry.
Okay. No, it's okay. It's getting self-conscious. So then you can then go backwards and find articles that deal with measures of academic performance. So whether you could see whether it's an accurate one or not to be measuring by GPA and academic scores. Taking a totally different example, let's say I'm interested in seeing personality type and traits and birth order. So then maybe I'm interested in finding whether there's like clumps, like firstborns are bossy. I'm going to make stuff up here. Firstborn are bossier, middle children are more emotionally volatile, and youngest children are spoiled. Just going to make stuff up here. So then I would give, so if that's what I'm trying, if that's my question, whether there's a link between birth order and personality trait, then I'm thinking I'm going to want to give a personality measure to assess specific personality types that will be linked then with birth order. So based on that, then I go back to my literature and I go, what is there out there about personality type and how can we assess it? And then what literature is there out there about birth order and how linked it is to personality? Does that kind of answer your question, Sam? Or anybody else? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, sorry, I was having trouble with the mute button.
Oh, okay. All right. So that's what I would do. So I would encourage all of you to start talking with your group so that you're all on the same page. Again, your papers will all be different. So you don't need to be getting together to figure out, oh, or did you find this article? Or let's use that article. There can be some differences there, and there should be. But in terms of what it is you want to assess, you should be on the same page. And we'll get into that right after the exam, like around week 9, methodology and surveys and all of that. Okay. All right. So for today's class, we're going to be looking at let's see, where is it? Here it is. Estimating frequencies of behaviors and beliefs. So let's do this here. Make sure that that's right. All right. You guys can all see this PowerPoint?
Yes.
So it's important for us to look at that because when we're thinking about doing a research study, obviously we want it to be ethical, we want it to be valid and reliable, and then we want our sample of participants to be reflective and generalizable to the greater population. And in order to really do that, we need to evaluate kind of both our deep set beliefs and just in general, how people view that their behaviors fit in with normal, so to speak, or average behavior, okay? So we'll talk about generalizability. Again, does your sample represent the population at large? And then we'll look at external validity. When you are doing any sort of study, you want to make sure that it can be generalizable, that your specific group was representative enough that it will actually be meaningful data that's given to you, that you're providing the community the other way around. So if you're saying 8 out of 10 American drivers experience road rage, would you say that that sample represents Americans? Just based on what you think, what you've experienced, would you say that's true?
I would say, yeah. I feel like most people get irritated on the road, but maybe, I don't know if 8 out of 10, but it seems like it could be true.
Okay. Anybody else?
It's kind of hard to tell because like, I don't know what they mean by road rage, but like, if it's like you get out of control road rage or like, you know, when you actually act on it, I would say no. But if it's like you just get angry while you're driving, then yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. So one of the ways you can assess that, it's a driving anger scale, the DAS. And on there, there's several levels of how you can experience anger, because you're absolutely right. You could just be in your car and go, oh, darn it, why did that guy have to cut me off, right? Maybe that's a low level of anger. It's still an emotional outburst. You said something, but it's different than, I cannot believe you did that. Now I'm going to speed up and tailgate, or I'm going to speed up in the other lane and cut him off. So that'll teach him, or I'm going to hit him, or I'm going to hit him, then get out of my car and get in a physical altercation. Obviously, I've just shown you how you can escalate the experience of anger from just a quick, like emoting anger and maybe a slight verbalization to an outright, like, I want to kill you kind of anger. So perhaps that's a tricky one. But again, if I were to look, let's say at Aquinas students, and I would poll students, let's say from this class, I think total in our class, there's 15 students or 14 students. And if I asked, and this is funny, this was on my Facebook feed or Instagram this morning. Now I feel like I need to find it, but no, okay, let's focus. It was, which of these Chris's do you want to kick out? And it was for a trivia group I'm part of. And it had Chris Pine. Oh gosh, I'm already losing it. What is the Chris, Captain America? What's his last name?
Chris Evans, and then Chris Pratt.
Oh my
I
gosh,
think
did you see
I know
it?
exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, so it's a little you guys, for the sake of science, let me find it real fast. We're gonna call this science. If someone else finds it first, please post it on here. Okay, it wasn't this exact one, but okay, can I put it? Oh, no, wait, let's be smarter. I can screen share. Okay, you guys see this? No. Do you guys see what I'm looking at? This picture of
Yeah.
4 Chris's.
Yeah.
Okay, Chris Pratt, Chris Pine, Chris Evans, and Chris Hemsworth. Okay, so the question is, which Chris would you like kick out? Which one do you not like? So for the sake of science, let's sample. In the chat, write the last name of the Chris that you would kick out of the group. Now, I'm not defining what that means. What is kicking out? Is it because you don't think they're as good of an actor, as muscular, as attractive, whatever your reasoning may be? We're going to keep it super vague. Okay. And then I am gonna, oh, wow. Okay. So let me do this here. Okay, so I am seeing, oh boy, you guys, this is bad. Maybe this is better. Oh yeah, see, all right. I have a touch screen, so this works too. All right, so I'm now gonna do a frequency. Okay, so starting from the beginning, I'm counting 1, 2, 2 for Chris Pratt. Okay, and then I'm gonna go back. Oh, thank you. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 for Pine. Okay, so that could be, all right, so that's my frequency. Now, what if I said something like, and we said there's only there's 8 of you in the class right now, I believe. Yeah, because I'm the 9th participant. I'm gonna vote, or should I not vote? Maybe I shouldn't vote. You shouldn't know what I think. Oh no, I should. You think I should?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh wait, Ada, did you just chime in with one more, or are you double voting?
No, I just chimed in with mine.
Okay, so one more for Pine, and I'm gonna go Pratt. Sorry, gang. However that means. Okay, so out of 9 students, so here's how I could say it. 6 out of 9 college students would kick Chris Pine out of the group of the Hollywood Chris's. Okay. Is that generalizable to all college students?
No,
Why?
because it's not a large enough sample and it's only within one class.
Okay, so you have 2 very good limitations. Sample size is too small, only one class. What might be something else?
Would one be like people may not know exactly who they are or any?
Totally. So I would include in there like vagueness of question and lack of direction. Hey, Greg, this is going to be a weird spot for you to be walking into this class. So watch the video because this is probably going to make no sense. Like you're saying that, I feel like I should stop sharing that. But okay, actually, you guys can't even see the screen here. Let me go back to that so you can see all the stuff I wrote. Okay, do you guys see that? I did the little frequency table here at the bottom. Okay. So yeah, that's problematic. What about the composition of our class? Is that a concern for us in any way?
Definitely mostly girls, if that matters.
Yeah. So yeah, Eliza, I think that's an issue, right? Like if I'm going to generalize this to all college students, and out of the 9 people who voted, 8 of them were female, I would say that is not a representative sample, right? It does not mirror what the average college breakdown is for gender. Okay, that was a long explanation for just the overview slide, but you see my point. So this is why it's important to look at all that information. Okay, so first thing that we need to look at is, does our sample does it represent the population? So our population is what? How do we define population?
Wouldn't a population be the entire group that you're studying? So like, now I can't explain it and
No, you're on the
way I
right
was
track, Sam.
thinking, but like, the population of Aquinas would be all the Aquinas students, whereas a cohort would be like a small portion of them or sample.
Exactly. Yep, exactly. So when you are doing a study and you want to know about American behavior, do you go and do a census, which is count every single person, or do you grab a standardized normal sample that's been kind of randomly selected to then represent that whole population? Well, most often we just do a sample because honestly, it takes so long. It is not cost effective. And frankly, there is diminishing returns. Whether you have a sample of 200 or a sample of 200,000, your results are not going to be that much more meaningful, right? So that is why samples exist. But inherent to doing any sort of sampling and doing a study with a sample comes possible limitations in regards to generalizability. First off, you want to know, was your sample biased in any way? In what way might my study here be biased? My little, which Chris do you kick out?
Wait, how are you asking how this might be biased?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely because we're all girls, and so we're considering definitely like attractiveness probably.
Okay. So yeah, then this sample, because it's not heterogeneous, right? It's mostly just one gender. That's problematic. Okay. What about the way that I selected my sample? Is there any bias in that?
Yes, because all the students in this class self-selected to be in it.
Yeah. Or I ended up saying like, hello, I'm an authority figure and your teacher, do this, right? Luckily, it was not a painful thing. I didn't have you do like complex calculus. It was looking at pictures and picking one to kick out. But yes, that is a biased sample. In fact, when we'll talk about sampling later on in this lecture, it is a sample of convenience. This was convenient, right? I wanted to assess what you guys thought. I wanted to use this example. It was convenient because you guys were all in front of me a bit as a captive audience, right? This is the same way when I get my college students, my doctoral students who want to run their study on views of leadership, and they're like, well, I'm going to collect data at Starbucks. Now, Starbucks may very well be a varied sample in terms of, well, no, let me just back it up. What might be good about a sample at Starbucks? And I'm not saying sample the beverages, I'm saying sampling for a research study. And what might be some limitations?
Depending on the research, you might be stalled in actually seeing different types of people because you're going to get people who are able to actually afford going to Starbucks, and
Yes.
you won't probably get lower income individuals if you're trying to do a study on how often adults are going to drink coffee. You'll only get how often adults who are economically well off able to drink coffee.
Excellent. So it's bias for socioeconomic status. Very good. What other bias might be present?
Could it be like location, like the place where the Starbucks is at? Like the surroundings and the community involved
Yeah.
could have an effect.
So in a way, geographically is also impacted because I know there's parts of this country where you can't find a Starbucks for miles. My sister lives in Dickinson, North Dakota. And when I flew out there the first time, I was like, I need coffee. I'm dying. I'm so tired. I was like, where's the nearest Starbucks? And she's like, Bismarck, an hour and a half. And I was like, what? Can I get back on this plane? Where I'm like, there's no Starbucks at your airport, which was a hilarious. I was on the plane still. She's like, you get off the plane and you tell me what you think. And I literally got out and I was like, I feel like I'm in a car rental office. How is this an airport? I don't know if any of you guys have been to the Dickinson airport. You might miss it as you get there because it is so itty bitty. There is no restaurant. That's hilarious. There's a one stall bathroom that's, unisex. And yeah, no Starbucks nearby at all. So geographically, that can be impacted. Now, they do have some coffee shops, second rate, but that's fine. They do have some, I think they have Caribou Coffee. She goes crazy for the Caribou Coffee. I've never been there. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, but okay. So going to a Starbucks to gather data could be, oh, Ashley, you're asking me. I am old. I'm Starbucks over Big B. Also, I'm from California. I didn't know what Big B was until a couple years back. And I'm still Starbucks. I was going to say, actually, I feel like Starbucks may show some level of ageism too. Oh, that's hilarious. You're shocked. Okay. You'll have to tell me which drink I should try at Big B. I'll give it a shot, but I don't like sweet things. So that should be part of the equation. But so yeah, I think Starbucks tends to lean maybe a little older too. Is that just me? Yeah. Okay, Ashley, lay it on me. So is Big B more for the young crowd?
I guess Big B would be more for like the small town people because I'm
Okay.
from the small town. So,
Okay, and they had a Big B.
yeah, and like
Okay.
all my friends like from back home are like Big B over Starbucks, and I'm like, yes. But then you come here, like it's a bigger town, a city, and everyone's like Starbucks over Big B, and then I get shamed for it.
Like with me, I'm from Chicago, so we don't have Big B, but we
Right.
just like have Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks. So
Yes.
it's different.
So, or Tim Hortons, which
No.
sidebar. I'm from originally Montreal, Canada. So Tim Hortons was my mecca. I was like, yes, come to me, all the donuts and the coffee and cream. I went by the one yesterday. I was on 44th and Kalamazoo. Went through the drive-through. This guy's like, we're closed. With tons of attitude. We closed at 3. And I was like, it is 3:02 on my watch. He's like, we're closed. I'm like, you have nothing left. Nope. I'm like, just 3 minutes ago, you were serving coffee. Is that carafe empty? You can't just pump some. I said, we're closed. And he shut me out. I was like, oh, frustrating. Don't get between somebody and their coffee in the middle of the afternoon when they're grumpy. There's a lot of tangents in today's class. I apologize. But yes. Okay. So sample and bias. If I am going to pick out people from Starbucks, I am biased with socioeconomic status. I am biased against geography. I'm going to have a biased sample probably because of age. And frankly, I don't know how variable the people are going to be inside Starbucks. It is honestly the most accessible and sample of convenience you can think of, right? And I think sometimes people go, well, that's a good thing, because then it's not like if you're gathering data at a school or at a church where they have something in common that brings them all there. Coffee, that's like basic human need, right? So it's not necessarily something about personality trait, but there are lots of pitfalls with those kinds of sampling. The same way that if you are a researcher working at a university and you sample undergrads, there is bias in sampling undergrads for general behavior of adults, right? Young adults will behave a little differently than older adults. Individuals who are actively involved in higher education, that is kind of a leader, that's not a word, a more elite group, right? Than if you're not. So again, we need to be mindful of bias with sampling, and there is always bias. News alert. Like there is no perfect sample. That is called the population. So, but what you try to do is minimize that bias as much as possible by using probability sampling techniques, which we will talk about in a minute. If you end up settling for an unrepresentative sample, if you're like, well, I really wanted a diverse sample, and out of 150 participants, 149 were white or were female or were had a master's degree, you are inherently accepting a unrepresentative sample of what you're trying to generalize to, which is going to lead to biased sampling. Now, I should say, if I am doing a study on women's perception of politicians, let's say, and I only interview women, is that a biased sample? Eliza, you shook your head. Tell me why.
I don't think it would be, because you pretty much just have to throw out if you did ask a guy, because that's not part of your question.
Exactly. So 100% correct. If my research question is for a specific group, the population would be all of the women in the United States. So a subsample, it still has to be women, because that's my research question. So it's not to say that if you have a homogeneous group, that will inherently be biased. If that is your research question, that is perfectly appropriate. But if you're saying this represents all of Americans and you only have women, that is a problem, okay? Because that is not representative of the entire country. Okay. Next slide. So what is the difference? So populations, that's who we want to measure, and that is the entire set of people or things in which you're interested. So if I'm looking at, like Sam was saying earlier, if I want to know about Aquinas College students, I need to find every single Aquinas student. If I am looking for how Americans behave, that would be looking at a census, how every single American responded or behaved. If I am looking at a specific religious group and their views, I would have to identify and ask all participants or all individuals within that religious group. A sample, on the other side, is a selection or a subset or a cohort that is taken from that population, okay? So if I'm interested in all of Aquinas' students' views on the new mascot, wasn't there a new mascot that was deployed like 2 years ago? I could do a subset rather than asking every single student. I could pull, kind of a diverse sample based on each class level, mixed with gender, and then see what are their opinions. Okay. A census is when you survey all the people in the population. That is considered doing a census. Whenever you select a way to sample for your study, you need to ask yourself this question: what is the population that I'm interested in? Is it all Americans? Is it college student? Is it women? Is it dog owners, right? Is it Republicans, because I'm interested in a certain political group? Is it Christians, right? So you need to be able to know, what is it I'm looking for? Who is the ideal candidate who's going to participate in my study? And almost as equally important, and I don't include this in this slide, but for your higher level, when you do studies, and even in our study for this semester, you need to also think about, who do I not want to be in my study? Like, so you want to look at inclusion criteria, who you are including in your criteria, and who you would want to exclude. Now, the word exclude is kind of loaded, right? People are like, I don't want to exclude anybody. That seems mean and harsh. Well, yes, in most instances it would be, but with research, you need to be thoughtful, because if you include everyone, you may end up with an outlier or a non-representative member within your sample. Let me give you an example. I want to know about the freshman experience and whether students stay motivated through I almost said 4 semesters, 4 quarters or 2 semesters of work in their first year of college. And I say, this is open to all freshmen, but I'm really interested in traditional freshmen or traditional college student. That's what I'm really trying to capture. Something about maybe a new generation and how I see their perseverance and determination through work, okay? If I then go and allow people to complete my study or my survey who are non-traditional freshmen, this would include folks who are returning back to school. Maybe they've had children, they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s. Their response might be significantly different than a traditional college age student. And why would I want to kind of parse that out?
Because it wouldn't be representative of the sample population you're trying to get an answer from.
Right. And the key piece here is, what is it I'm trying to ask, right? What is my question? If my question has to do with perseverance and determination in traditional age college student, that's what I need to look at. Now, if my question was a slightly tweaked, Does age or past experience impact college success the first year? Now, all of a sudden, that's a totally different question. And I probably would want everyone included because I would want to compare, right? But if what I'm trying to see is just the traditional college age, then I need to exclude those that do not meet that criteria, which is a traditional college age. Does that make sense? I think oftentimes people get like a little awkward saying like exclude, that seems mean and pejorative and somehow prejudicial. And it's like, no, we need to be very, very clear as to who belongs in our study to try to minimize any possible confusion as to our results, right? Because if you include an outlier, that is going to impact your results, and you are not going to be able to know if the results you got were due to a confound, meaning an underlying variable that wasn't actively measured, or was it due to the construct you're actually measuring, okay? Okay, so here's a few examples. If you are interested in looking at Democrats in Texas, a biased sampling technique would be to recruit people sitting in the front row at the Texas Democratic Convention. Okay, that would be biased. An unbiased sampling technique would be to obtain a list of all registered Texas Democrats from public records and calling a sample of them through randomized digit dialing. Okay, what is the main difference between these two? Because both end up with Democrats, right? So what's the big deal?
The first one introduces bias because it's more than likely that individuals attending a DNC convention are going to be Democratic unless they're working with the press or whatnot. Therefore, you're already adding the bias into the sample by having the people that you know are Democrats.
Okay, but so playing devil's advocate here, this group here that's considered unbiased, that's all the folks who are registered Democrats. So we know that's all going to be Democrats.
The unbiased one has like the randomized in its description, which
Okay.
would be better.
Good. So we're getting closer. Random, that's a big piece. Anything else that pops out?
The unbiased one has records, so like
Okay.
you know for sure whether or not they are.
Okay. Now I'm going to take a guess here, and you guys correct me because I am doing a very bad thing. I am assuming, but I will assume that most of you, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that most of you have not been at a political convention, Democratic, Republican, either way. Am I making a correct assumption? Okay. What type of individual would be more likely to attend a political convention?
People who are like really passionate about the problems in the
Okay.
group.
So somebody who's super passionate, like actively involved, like this is their jam. They are all about it. Is there something that might be non-representative within those individuals to the entire group that is that political party? What do we think?
They probably hold more firmly held beliefs
Yeah.
than the general Democrats.
Yeah, I think if you can think of any issue, political or otherwise, like maybe you're like, you think, you know, I want to be a vegetarian because animal treatment, that's important to me. So I'm going to be a vegetarian. Does that mean that you are then at PETA demonstrations holding signs and picketing? No, those two are not usually like in the same group. It's a smaller percentage of people, right, that would actually go to a demonstration or would go to a convention. That's a smaller group. So if we just look at them as representing the whole group, you're almost looking, if you look at a continuum, on a more extreme band, and you're capturing their beliefs. And the extremes don't represent the whole. So that's why that would be a biased sample. Okay.
Another thing that I just thought of that you could think about is like the biased one. Like just because there's a Texas Democratic Convention doesn't mean that everyone's from Texas. Like people could be
Yes.
traveling.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. So geographically, that may not be accurate. Very good. Okay, let's look at this next one. Drivers. If that is your population of interest, a biased sample could be to ask drivers to complete a survey when they stop to add coins at a parking meter. And an unbiased sampling technique would be to obtain a list of licensed drivers in each state and select a sample using a random number generator. Okay, what do we think? What's the main difference between the two?
In the like biased when although you are asking drivers, there could be like drivers who don't have a license, whereas in like the unbiased one, like they actually have a license and they're drivers.
Good. Okay. Although the population doesn't say licensed drivers, it just says drivers. But yeah, you're right. That is a difference. Okay. What's another problem with the biased one?
Geographically, you could have people from like either like one state or they could be from different states, so it could be a mixture as compared to the unbiased one.
Okay. Yeah, and I think going with geographically, I think the biggest piece is that it really will limit who gets included in that study, because it's not everywhere that you have parking meters, right? So what is it inherently pulling from? It's going to pull from bigger cities, right? You're not going to get folks from rural areas that might not have parking meters. Okay. Also, sidebar, how often are you putting coins in machines these days? Right? Like, I feel like downtown, you're just using a card, you're punching a code. So that would be different, but okay. 2018, this book tries. Okay, if your population of interest is looking at students who have taken a class with Professor A, a bias sampling technique might be to include only students who have written comments about Professor A on an online website, versus the unbiased sample, which is obtaining a list of all of Professor A's current and former students and selecting every 15th student for the study. What do you think about the difference here? Where is their bias?
I think the bias is that, again, people who are going to take the time to go write a comment about Professor A probably have like a really strong opinion either way.
Yes. I would say being on the receiving ends of teacher evaluation, every class probably there's one, sometimes two comments, and it's the ones who are like, she's amazing, or she is the worst ever. Our classes were so hard, or her class was so easy. I mean, it's like polar extremes, right? So absolutely, you're going to have bias because it's going to be just one side versus the other. Okay. All right, good. I think we're getting a grasp here on bias versus unbiased. Okay, this is exactly what we were just talking about. It's bias when it contains too many unusual people. And by unusual, it's not that you disagree with them here. It's not that you disagree with the politics. It's that it is not a normative or average individual within that group. So like we talked about, it is not average or common for somebody to go to a convention. It is average or common to have a political affiliation. That's totally fine. But to go that extra step, that's less common. Okay. Now, here's other ways to get a biased sample. So if you are only looking to sample those who are easily accessible, that is another problem. Okay. So this table here is showing us the health behavior data of participants from different phone ownerships, okay? So these are the people that have a landline only or landline and wireless household. This is wireless household only, and this is folks who have no phones whatsoever. So you can look here at what might be some of the challenge here. You need to make sure that you have all the information. They ended up looking at somehow separating it by the way they own a phone as their way to classify it. So your whole sample C, it was mostly divided between having a landline or landline and cell phone versus cell phone only over here. That's 48.4 versus 48.3%. And 3% of folks said they don't have any phones at all. And then the health indicators were current smoker, at least one heavy drinking day in the past year, and received influenza vaccine in the past year. Again, we're kind of going all over the place with this little health appraisal. So there's two ways we can get a biased sample where it can threaten our external validity. Remember, like sampling errors lead to external validity problem because it's hard to generalize. So one of those ways is by sampling those who are easiest to contact, which would be, I think we talked about that, a sample of convenience. So this here would be, again, I don't quite know how they accessed it. I guess it would be via internet. It's hard to know because they obviously didn't call them because some of these people wouldn't have received it, but they divided it. Now, if I had just said, I'm going to call cell phones, I would be omitting this large percentage here of the population that might not have a chance to answer. Another way, there's another example here that I wrote down. In the last 10 years, psychologists have been conducting research through websites such as Amazon's Mechanical Turk and Prolific Academy. So people who want to earn money for participating in research can do so online. You can self-select to participate in studies. So even though these samples are convenient, right? You can just post on there, I have a study, who wants to participate? People who complete the studies on those websites sometimes show personality traits and political beliefs that differ from members of the greater adult population, okay? Because one of you said it earlier, if you are self-selecting in a study, your personality is going to be different than someone else. You guys probably have noticed that within your peer group. Somebody like, hey, do you have a second? I have a quick, they're holding their clipboard. I have a quick question for you. Have you guys experienced that at the mall or school? And you get those who are like, no, thanks, don't have time. Click, 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 click. And someone else who's like, yes, ask me all the questions. I would love to help you. I have a benevolent heart and want to give back, right? That kind of speaks back to your personality type. And then inherently, whatever you share, whatever you say is likely going to be skewed in some way or biased in some way, because you may not be representative of the entire group. You present some differences. Okay, oh, I just finished talking about that. So if you sample only those who volunteer, that is also problematic. As I was saying, you have issues of self-selection. If you think about ratings on Yelp or Google review, again, these are people who decided to provide a review. So you have a very good chance that you're going to get extremes. You're going to get somebody who thought your kebabs were the best on the face of the planet, and others were like, I had food poisoning, right? Either way. You are not getting a good sense of how everybody feels because you have a much lower percentage of people who are raters versus those who are non-raters, okay? Okay, this figure here shows if you're gonna keep your child in the rear-facing seat. It invited readers to vote on their plans. Now we can see what it states over here. So it invited them to respond. We had 58% that said, yes, I'll keep my child rear-facing until age 2 or 3. 23% says, no, I'll turn my child forward-facing before age 2. And 19% said, I'm not sure. What might be the issue with this?
It might force some people to change their opinion because they don't want people to look at them as a poor parent. And isn't it that now, like, you have to have your child facing back? So
Yeah.
I know a lot of people might feel like they don't want people judging their parenting techniques.
Totally. Yeah. And so the other piece is that people read, it was an article, and at the end of the article, they said, hey, do you want to complete a quick survey? So first, you're also asking people to self-select in. It's based on people that finished the article that just said this is what you should do. So they're more likely to state, yes, I'm going to keep my child in the rear facing car seat, rather than the population at large that may not even know about this latest recommendation, right? So if I'm looking to generalize it to all US parents of a toddler, this study may not be accurately portraying how most people will respond. Okay, very good. Okay, now this is rage and aggression on the road. So this states nearly 80%, or that 8 out of 10 I was telling you guys earlier, of drivers expressed anger, aggression, or road rage behind the wheel at least once in the past year. Okay, study reported by AAA. It's an online survey that was completed on road rage. So the respondents had been randomly sampled. Whenever you hear that, that should be ding, 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 ding. That's probably better. So randomly sampled and invited to respond, so we can probably generalize better from this poll as to the behaviors of the average American. And then remember how we were talking about earlier, kind of the gradation of emotionality that you have in terms of expressing anger? You could see here, 3% said they would ram or bump another vehicle on purpose. Eesh, right? This is kind of a big deal. Hello, Lucas. Quieter, please. Okay, 4% would get out of the vehicle to confront another driver. I mean, do these numbers surprise you? That still seems high to me. Maybe you're like, no, I do this all the time. It's fine. Sometimes they need to be talked to. 12% would cut off another vehicle on purpose. 24% would block another vehicle from changing lanes. I feel like I do see that quite often. People get upset and then they ride in the middle, which, yeah. 33% make an angry gesture. That just happened to me very recently. I was not the offender of the angry gesture. It was a gal that was probably in her 80s would be my bet. And she was wearing gloves, so it was hard to decipher, but I'm pretty sure that was not a friendly thumbs up. 45% would honk to show annoyance or anger. 47% would yell at another vehicle, and 51% would tailgate on purpose. So this is interesting too, that out of these, the most common behavior is tailgating, which especially in winter, like how dangerous is that? Versus yelling, which I think that's in winter, that's less dangerous because there's a good chance that the other person would have no clue you're yelling. If it's summer and your windows are down, that's maybe more instigating, but yeah. Okay. All right. So how do we actually go about obtaining a representative sample? Like, we're talking about random. How do you do that? What are your thoughts? What do you think? If right now I gave you a list of 100 people, how would you go about coming up with something random?
Number them 1 to 100 and then do a random number generator.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm showing here. Random number generator is going to give you the list. So this is a website that you can utilize. It'll tell you exactly what is the range and how many you're looking to get, and then it'll spit out a result, and then you can know exactly which one to grab out of those. Okay. Excel can do the same thing. Obviously, this website can run the same. There are several random number generators. We've done that with our children using the Echo or Alexa. You pick a random number between this number and that number. It'll just spit it out. So there's several different options, but ultimately you can't What is not considered random sample is for you to go, 3, 9, 14, 22, 42, and 51. You know, picking random numbers in your head. That is not right, right? Why is that not the same? What do we think? Or maybe you think it is the same.
Could it be because as humans, we interject bias without even knowing it? So like you might try and be random, but you're actually not being random because you're trying to find a certain pattern to follow. So like having one number from each out of the 10. So like going 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 or whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if any of you guys have ever played the lotto or had your parents play the lotto, and then you see the ticket number and you're like, how is this possible? All 6 numbers or 5 numbers are all below 10. Like, that's not right. No, that's random, right? Or all 5 could be, it could be 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, right? Because if you think about it, randomize means you have an equal chance of grabbing each number every time you pull out a number. But the way our brains work is we would not do that. What did I do when I gave you guys a randomized sample right there when I was just saying out numbers?
You didn't really choose numbers close to one another. You tried to go higher each time and not
Yes.
have any within like one digit.
Right. So there was an ascension in my numbers, and I tried to change the numbers because in my mind, I'm like, well, that would be random, right? But that's faulty thinking. So that is why using a random number generator is key. Now, that's not the only way to have a strong sample. There's multiple ways that you can have a very strong sampling technique that is not a randomized study, okay? So you could do cluster sampling. That would be clustering participants within a population of interest and that are randomly selected. And then all individuals in each selected cluster are then used, okay? So if I'm looking at preschools within a city that I live in, I could randomly select 20 preschools, and then all of the children in those 20 preschools would be selected as my participants. Same thing, I could select randomly 15 high schools in Michigan, and then all of those students would be sampled from there, okay? That is doing a cluster sampling. That is different than if I said, I'm interested in high school behavior for students in Michigan, and now I'm gonna somehow have a list of every single student that's enrolled in high school and create a number generator, okay? That's different. Instead, I'm gonna keep them in clusters. The benefit of doing that is I end up with an entire population of a given school or a given cluster, and then that can be used for comparison as well. So now cluster sampling is great because it's kind of that added benefit that there's a randomized portion to it, and you can also compare groups, but you are then getting a much larger participation pool, and you are also almost doing a census of that one cluster. So that is a bit more difficult, right? So it's going to take more time. You're going to have a larger sample to manage. Okay. Multi-stage sampling would be randomly selecting high schools and then students from the school. So that's doing more than one stage of sampling. So the first stage would be random sampling of high schools. And then within those high schools, I would do a random sample of students. So you've got 2 sets of randomized sampling. Okay. Stratified random sampling is a little bit different. That is sampling from particular demographic categories to get an overall sample that mimics, mirrors, or is roughly representative of the population at large that I'm interested in. So if I'm interested in getting a sample of how Michiganders feel about snow days, right? And if I'm using a stratified random sample, I would then go to the entire census of Michigan and figure out what is the diversity breakdown in terms of race and ethnicity. And I'm going to seek to mimic that. so that once I have my random sample, I will know that I have the same level of diversity in it, which gives me greater external validity because it's more generalizable to my original population at large. Okay, does that make sense? In a college student group, like if I'm interested in gathering data from college students, the way this would look like is if I'm interested in all of Aquinas, I would want to know what is the breakdown between freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior. And I would want that to be somewhat mimicked in my random sample so that I'm not getting a sample that has 90% freshmen. Inherently within that, they may have different beliefs than the general population. Does that kind of make sense? So that's one of the benefits, again, of stratified random sampling. Okay. Oversampling would be overrepresenting one or more groups. Okay. So that would be, let's say in Michigan, I know that the diversity is really low, but I'm specifically interested in a specific minority group. So I would oversample within that minority group to really get them to speak up, especially if I'm trying to get the difference between a majority and a minority. Let's see if there's something else I want to see. Yeah, I think I described that. Systematic sampling, this would be slightly different than doing the randomized sampling, right? Randomized, I'm using a random number generator. There's no system to it. It is completely random. With a systemized sampling, I am using some sort of system, but the idea is that it would yield me just as random result as picking a random number. So if I figure out a sample size, right, that I want, which is 20, I could divide the Aquinas population by that number, right? If I want 20 students, I would divide the whole population, which is 2001, divided by 20, and that gives me about 100. So then I could sample every 100th student. Now, this would still require that I have some sort of list or ledger of every single student, and I would just go down the list and go, there's the 100th, go down the list, here's the 100th, and so on and so forth. This systemized sampling is very common with the TSA, right? In what way is it common there?
Don't they do random checks on each certain number of passengers that are coming through the airport to ensure they're not bringing bad stuff?
Exactly. Yes. So it is systematized. And why is that? Why is it not like to their own discretion?
I don't know for sure, but could it be to avoid bias, like with what's profiling people that they believe could be individuals bringing a threat to a plane?
100%, right? Let's think in an era post 9/11, before systematized sampling took place in terms of, you guys probably have had that, like the check, they like wipe your hands to see if you have gunpowder residue, or they'll have some people go into a full body scan rather than just the metal detector. Right after 9/11, there was a lot, like Sam was just talking about, profiling or prejudice. And so then all of a sudden, only one ethnic or religious group was being asked to do the extra security measure, right? What about drunk driving test? Or not drunk driving test, like there's like blockades, right? Or sobriety checkpoints. Do they just pick whoever they think, or do they use a system? What do we think?
I feel like they use
Probably.
Use a system? How about you,
Mhm.
Mar?
Yeah, use a system. I know like it happened like in our neighborhood where they were doing like every 3 cars or something.
Yeah. Were you going to say something too, Sam?
Yeah, I was just going to say use the systematic sampling.
Now, curveball your way. This is kind of stepping out of just straight research, but can you still insert a human factor into that kind of systematized sampling? In other words, if you're doing every third car is getting a sobriety check, but then actually the fourth car is coming in and they're veering and curving, are you like, well, you're safe, you're car number 4, right? No, right? So there's still a human element to these things. In research, we try to eliminate that as much as possible so we stay as non-biased. But when you're doing sampling with a cost benefit, remember that in ethics, right? Cost benefit, I'm trying to keep, what is my goal? I'm trying to keep people safe on the road, or I'm trying to keep people safe on the plane. There is going to be a human factor that enter into it. But in order for it to not be solely human factor, I'm only going to use my own judgment. And I know no one would drive drunk if they're driving a Mercedes. That's a dumb conclusion I've just created in my brain, right? Then a systematized sampling allows you to be far more accurate too. Okay. Questions about that? Or is that pretty straightforward? Okay. FYI, you will want to know all of these for the exam. So make a little note. I am not big into like define and use exact words. No, I'm far more like apply it. What does it look like so that you grasp it? All right, convenience sampling, we have talked about that a lot today. So that is when you are finding the easiest way to get fresh bodies in front of you to complete your survey or to participate in your experiment. Within a sample of convenience, you are accepting a certain level of bias, but you're saying, it's fine because in the end, I just need to get this done. There are certainly times where that is an appropriate thing to do, right? Again, for the purpose of this class, utilizing our class as a sample to demonstrate examples, perfectly appropriate. But I'm also not publishing the findings of our which Chris would you kick out into an empirical journal as to this is what college students think, right? Okay. Purposive sampling, we kind of talked about this a minute ago when we talked about studying women, but that is when you want to study a specific kind of people. So for instance, teens who want to use social media. Well, that's what you need to recruit then. You are not going to be asking your 80-year-old grandma to participate who calls it the Facebook, or whatnot. So you need to make sure that you are sampling and recruiting participants that are directly related to your research question. Snowball sampling, it's a slight variation of the purposive sampling. It's when you ask participants to recruit other participants like them. Now, honestly, this is mostly done in a qualitative study where you are having the researcher interview participants. Very rarely would that be for a survey, but it's when you're, again, looking at a very specific group. So I helped out a doctoral student several years back, and he was specifically interested in what leadership traits and challenges higher level CEOs who are African American experience in their journey to become a CEO. Right now we're like, we went from, leadership skills, okay, CEO, whoop, that gets much smaller. African American CEOs, that gets real tiny, very specific purposive sample. And oftentimes within the very highly specific sampling communities, they may know others much like them that are in that specific group. And so then they can help you by saying, oh, here's 3 other people that qualify or that would be in that same group. Let me put my dog out. Okay, so that would be a snowball technique. Another way to think about it would be, I'm interested in seeing Olympians' ability to manage jobs while doing intensive training, right? Maybe that's my interest. How do they juggle it all? How do they do it? And maybe I know 2. And so I asked them, but then what are the odds that they would know other fellow Olympians? Probably quite likely and more than I would. So then you would ask them to recruit more participants, and then you would ask that level to recruit more. And the idea is you snowball as you go through, so you get greater and greater numbers. Okay. Yeah. Quota sampling is a little bit different. So that is when you set a target number for each group and you keep sampling until you reach that number. So if I was interested in having equal samples for different ethnic and racial groups, or different identification for sexual preferences and identity or whatnot, then I would need to make sure that I target that same number and I keep recruiting until I hit that number. Okay. So if I'm interested again in, college behavior, I could say I'm going to need an equal size sample for both freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior. And I'm going to keep on recruiting until I get to that point. Okay. Questions about all of these?
So just to make sure, are these techniques that shouldn't be used or techniques that can be used depending on the research topic?
Perfect question. And yes, these are all the different methods that you may use. And the way to know which one you should use will depend on your research question. Okay. For the purpose of our class and our research study, we will be using a convenience sample. You will be recruiting via Facebook. It is not going to be a randomized sample. That's just not feasible with what we're trying to aim, right? So that's okay. Does that help? Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. Okay, great question. All right, how do we then combine techniques? So again, this is my population of interest, whatever it is. This is who I am looking for to answer my research question, or this is what I'm trying to learn more about, okay? So you can then use all members of the population of interest and have an equal and known chance, right? By doing this, you're doing a probability sampling. You're using the entire group, and then you're going to grab a subsample from them. And it's based on probability. It could be simple random sample, that would be a random number generator. Somehow doing a cluster sample or a multi-stage sample. You could do a stratified random sample, systematic sample, or oversample. But all of this, you've determined everyone that's in the group, and then you have some sort of system in place to identify who you'd want to participate in your study, okay? The other way, which is non-probability sampling, you are inherently kicking people out, or there are certain folks that are not going to be included as part of your study. One of it is going to be convenience sampling, because there's going to be like inherent bias because of it. Quota sampling, snowball sampling, and purposive sampling, again, you're looking at a very specific group of people. So you're pushing other people out because of it. Okay. So again, probability sampling is on this side, non-probability sampling is on that side. Neither one is better than the other. It all goes back to what is your research question and whether you ended up pursuing a sampling method that fit your research question. It's got to be both of those. Because if you know who you need to include and you're like, well, I really should be doing simple random, but I don't have the time or energy. So I'm just going to do convenience sampling. I'm going to park myself right outside of Target and just, see who wants to take my survey, right? So you got to know, what is your research question? What does it tell you to do? And you got to follow up with it. Okay. This is another way you can kind of define these. If it's externally valid, meaning it has strong external validity, meaning it is generalizable, okay? These would be some of the words you would hear. So it's an unbiased sample, it's a probability sample, it's a random sample, representative sample, all of those things. If you have, where is my cursor? There it is. Your faces are covering my chart here. If you have an unknown external validity, meaning you're not so sure whether you have a sound study here, you may have a biased sample. You're likely using a non-probability sample or non-random sample, and you may even be using an unrepresentative sample. So I would say the first and last are most problematic. If you have a biased sample and you don't address that in your study, that's an issue, right? And if you have a sample that does not represent the general public, but you're claiming it does, that's another problem. Okay. All right. Random sampling versus random assignment. Slight difference here. So with random sampling, you're creating a sample using some sort of random method, right? Maybe a random number generator, so that each member of the population of interest has an equal chance of being in the sample. All right, I want to know about Aquinas student. Every Aquinas student is going to be on my spreadsheet. I'm going to use a random number generator. It's going to highlight 100 of them, and those are the ones that I asked to participate in my study. This increases your external validity because it allows generalizability to your population. Okay, that is random sampling. Random assignment is different. That is used only in experimental design to assign participants to groups at random. So this would be, remember the video we watched by Goldacre? People could be put in any one group. You could be in a placebo group. You could, so like getting a sugar pill, you could be getting the old treatment or the new treatment. You are then randomly assigned to one of those three conditions. So what you could do is you could randomly sample, people between the ages of 18 and 25 within the Northwest. So that's my goal. I would have a list of all those people. I would invite 1,000 to participate in my study. So that would be random sampling. Those 1,000 show up, and now I need to figure out who's going to be in which group. So I would put 300 in one group, 300 in the other, 300 in the other. They are randomly assigned to each group. So random sampling, it increases your external validity, makes it more generalizable. Random assignment increases your internal validity. Okay, main difference here. We really only have, random assignment can be done in the social sciences as well. If you think about a pre and post test kind of situation, where you're introducing some sort of intervention or maybe doing therapy, seeing if that helps behavior. You could be randomly assigned to a therapy group or just a reading group, right? But that would still be experimentation. It just doesn't have to always be drugs involved with it. Okay, so what is most important? What matters the most? So if you are doing frequency claims, like 8 out of 10 Americans experience driving anger, like we talked about, you need to make sure with frequency claims that external validity is a priority. Because again, if I'm making claims about a population and my sample is faulty, with frequency claims, it just throws it out the window. It's not going to be helpful. But when a representative sample is not the top priority, you tend to go with you tend to go with the next level, right? So if you're not looking at a random sample, if that's not necessarily your goal, because you're trying to make association claims or causal claims, you can look at different types. So one would be, again, because this is how the world works, most of the world is not operating on non-random sampling. But you can, so for instance, you can look at product reviews on Amazon, right? Now, if people are providing reviews, we talked about that, that's probably going to be biased. But for you as a consumer, are you okay with that? Is it okay that it's biased? I would say it's probably fine, right? Because if there are people who think it's amazing and people who think it's awful, you as the consumer can look at the evidence and make a decision based on that review, right? You could say, yeah, there are like 3 really bad reviews, but there are 3,000 amazing reviews. So chances are I'm probably going to feel like those 3,000 people who thought this thing was the next best thing, the sliced bread. I'm trying to think of. Yeah, I can show you this. I just purchased this on Amazon like a few months ago because I wanted a tissue box cover. And I am somebody who does a lot of reviews. And this one received great reviews because the Kleenex can actually come out of the little house very easily. So it's easy to grab on. There are others that were much cuter than this plain white box, right? But people were like, you have to keep digging in there and it doesn't come out. I'm like, what's the point of that, right? Okay, so with product reviews, for instance, you are probably okay with there being some level of bias. We have to also recognize that there are non-random samples that are in research studies. That's just what ends up happening. Most people who do studies research with undergraduates. That's just what happens. So you have to recognize that that's where your sample is going to be coming from. Again, if you're trying to see teens who use social media, you're going to have a specific type of group, right? It's going to be harder to look at the use of social media in 65 years or older because you just have a much smaller sample of them. Now, this is key, and we started talking about it at the start of class. Large samples do not necessarily mean more representative samples. It's not the bigger, the better, right? This is not a case of that. Now, if your sample size is super, super small, that's going to be hard to overgeneralize. But like we said, you reach a point of diminishing returns or you plateau in a way as to having more people making a difference in your study, okay? This is the margin of error within a study. Now you can see here, you might think going from 10% to 7% is a pretty significant drop and you're willing to do that because that means 100 people, you can kind of manage that. But to go from 10% to 3%, you'd have to, it's an exponential gain, right? You'd have to go from 100 people to 1,500 people. That is not necessary. It's not necessarily helpful or needed to have so little error, okay? So the margin of error is important to take a look at when you're picking your sample size. Now in statistics, if you get further into it in research, we'll talk about effect sizes and how that matters to have statistically significant data. But just know that, yeah, obviously if you have a sample of 5 people and you're like, and this means what all women believe, that's not going to be effective, right? But I don't necessarily think that you need 2,000 to really get a strong grasp and minimize error as to what women believe. Could be that 200 is just fine. Does that make sense? Okay. This is a lot of information today. How are we doing? Does it kind of make sense? Okay. This is one of those lectures where you'll want to review it again, especially for the exam where I have you guys apply it. Know that for our class, we are using a sample of convenience for our study because that's what we have time to do. We don't really have many more options. And that, again, there's not necessarily, oh, this one's really bad, this one's really good. Usually simple random is the best, or it's considered the greatest level of generalizability, but again, it's all back to what is your original research question, and that'll dictate how you should sample. All right, does this make sense? All right, that's all I've got for you guys then. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll post this on our YouTube page in just a minute, and we'll go from there and see you guys on Friday.
Have a good day.
Bye, you guys.